My name is Lexi Levy-Milani, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on getting ready to move your data. A little bit about Fíonta for anyone who's not familiar. We were founded in 2001, so a little over 20 years ago now, to serve nonprofits and associations with their technology needs. Since then, we've gotten to work with over 1,000 amazing clients. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C., although now we are a remote first company, so only about half of our 60 or so employees live in the DC metro, and the rest are distributed across the country. We are women owned and majority woman, which is still pretty rare in the tech industry, so we're happy to call that out. And we are a Salesforce.org premium partner, which is the highest level of consulting partner on the .org side, as well as a Fontiva implementation partner. So we have worked with hundreds of organizations, migrating them from legacy systems to the Salesforce Nonprofit Success Pack and to Fontiva AMS. We also offer an in-house user experience design and website development practice, which complements those core practices in many ways. I usually try and fit all 1,000 clients on the slide, but obviously that doesn't work. So these are just a few of the amazing clients that we've had the opportunity to work with in the past few years. And now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing today's presenter, Jennifer Alonso. Jennifer is a senior Salesforce consultant at Fíonta, and she's also a project technical lead, which is where she's gotten the sort of boots on the ground information that she's going to present today about preparing your data for a big move. So in addition to being sort of being a Salesforce certified consultant, she is a runner, a gardener, and a communications guru with an academic background in communications, by which I mean she was actually a professor of communications and will no doubt communicate much better than I am. So with that said, it's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer. Jennifer, you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Lexi. I'm so glad you all are here today. We are going to talk about aside from communications, my other passion, which has to do with making sure that my clients are prepared for their implementations, so those implementations can go smoothly. So today we're going to talk about data, things you can do with your data right now to make sure that your implementation and your data migration goes well. Our idea here is to talk about the point of data and the point of thinking about it now, when you are just now thinking about an implementation, a data migration, or a data cleanup. We're going to talk about something just fell off, excuse me. We're going to talk a little bit about the tasks that will be required for you to do that cleanup. And we're going to talk about one of my clients that didn't do anything that I'm going to tell you about today, and the impact for them and their migration, just as a word of warning to underline why thinking about your data, even if you think your implementation or new database is years away, starting now is really going to benefit you. And then we'll have some time for discussion as well. As Lexi pointed out, you are welcome to ask questions in the Q&A anytime, and I'll try and catch those with Lexi's help. Okay. All right. So what's the point? So we are going to use a moving house metaphor here. And a fun fact about me is that when I lived in Denver in the early and late 90s, there was a huge condo boom, which meant that I got to move apartments 7 times in 5 years. So I got really, really good at moving during that time. And one of the things that became really clear to me is the minute I got that 30-day notice, because your apartment's going condo and you got to get out, was I needed to start sorting through all my things, donating what I could, trashing what I didn't need anymore. I needed to pack everything up into the right box and then label that box to go into my new house. And the most important part is, before I put things in that box, I needed to dust them off and clean them and make them shiny new, so when I unpacked them, my house would be nice. Thinking of that and the point of data, there's some things that I think, because we all work with data all the time, and we all have our spreadsheets and we all have our databases, whether it's Salesforce or a legacy database, because we work with it all the time, I think we assume that the data migration will be simple. And I'm here to tell you that with our clients, on all clients, all partners, data and moving data is the most complicated part of an implementation. It's not the sexiest part. There's not a bunch of AI and there's not a bunch of automation and cool things. That means you can press this button to make this thing happen. But without clean, trustable data, of course, your implementation will be a failure, right? You have to have, your users have to be able to trust the data, and it has to be right and easy to use for your Salesforce implementation or your AMS implementation to work well. Therefore, when we move into a migration and the data is not clean or the data has not been groomed in a good way, it increases the budget and it increases the schedule. And so we have had clients that had to delay their launch by 6 to 8 months because they had to do a data cleanup in the middle of an implementation. And the same thing in terms of budget, that it's easy to say, well, we've been working with this data all the time. We know it's clean, and then to find halfway through a migration that in fact, actually the data is not clean, the data is not in a good spot, and it's going to suddenly, instead of in a way that's planned, cost you a lot more money. So as a tech lead, I like my projects to be on time and on budget. And so that's why we're talking about this today. All right, so we want your new system to be useful right off the bat with a clean and updated data set and increase staff adoption, right? The first thing that is going to make people not flip Salesforce or Fontiva on is if their data is wrong. Okay. All right, so I started with a computer in 2nd grade with a program called Logo, and the first thing we learned on that day was garbage in, garbage out. And it's the same with your data and the same with your migration. So no matter how well we do your migration, do our scripting, do our mapping, if the data is a mess in the system that you're in right now, we don't do anything to clean it up, then your data will also be a mess in Salesforce and Fontiva. And that's why the time to start is now, because it takes a lot of time and effort and it's tedious to clean up that data. If you're thinking now, it means that you can think in-house. What can you do with your resources and how long will it take to clean up your data? So just say, for example, you have 10,000 records and you need to really look through all of them for proper addressing. That's a lot of records. And if you have to do that in the middle of your implementation, in addition to all the other work you're doing, but if you can think now, hey, we're thinking about a new database within a year or in 3 months, you can begin to ask your users, hey, can everyone scan 30 records a day or 40 records a day or 40 records a week, and begin to get that data as clean as you can get it in-house. The other thing to think about is if it's as simple as making sure the street address and the state are in 2 different fields, it might be worth hiring some temporary help because you can control that in your time now. If you're in mid-migration, you may have to pay for us to do it, and that always makes me sad. All right. Okay, so I talked about planning with my 7 moves in 5 years. Time to think about planning is now. So what's going on with your data right now? Does your data already have a relationship? So for example, Salesforce, the way Salesforce works, no matter what the organization is accounts are on top. That's your very first level, and contacts go below that. Many legacy systems have accounts and contacts within the same object or don't have a relationship between those things. So think to yourself, if I'm looking at, for example, a set of spreadsheets, and I have a lot of organizations on one sheet, and I have a lot of contacts that belong to those organizations on another sheet, do I have a way to connect them besides in my brain? And if you do, great. And if you don't, maybe now is the time to start thinking about, can we connect these? Another thing to think about is if you have lots of users in your organization, some of them may be using the database. Some may also be doing really critical work on a spreadsheet. So to find out, okay, are you using a spreadsheet? Are you doing critical work? And are you holding the unique ID for the database in that spreadsheet, so that when you want the work in your spreadsheet to go into Salesforce as a source of truth, are you going to be able to match those pieces of information together? The other thing to do is to review your notes field. So of course, nobody on this webinar would ever put important things like birth dates in a notes field, but there may have been people with your organization who maybe worked there like a year ago, who don't work there anymore, who maybe put important information about board members, VIP members, high level donors, really important information that should be in its own field into a notes field. You do want that information moving forward, and you want to be able to report it. So that means you need to clean up those notes now. So if someone a year ago, not now, but a year ago, made a habit of putting birth dates in that field, go ahead and make in notes, go ahead and make a birth date field now, and then take your 40 records a week or whatever, and get those cleaned up now so that you're not trying to parse those all. With our data architect, who is lovely, absolutely generous, lovely man, but also very expensive. We're not trying to find a script for him to do it, right? He says, a script can do anything. It's how much you want to pay for it, right? So notes fields are a place where there's important information that belongs in another field. Now is the time to start looking at that. And this relates, we really want to look for unique identifiers. And if you're an organization who's like, oh, we should be no problem because we're working on spreadsheets. We're working, this Salesforce, our Salesforce implementation with Fíonta is going to be our first, real database. Those spreadsheets may be the most complicated to deal with because you may have 7 or 8 people who are doing their own spreadsheet with overlapping data with no key. So if that's the case, now is the time to identify Jen Alonso on Marcy's spreadsheet and Jennifer Alonso on Deborah's spreadsheet with a unique key so that you can begin to put that information together. All right, more planning. You got to get all the data together. And this goes back to what I just said. Of course, nobody in this webinar would have a personal spreadsheet where they're doing work when there's another legacy system, but it does happen, right? That folks who are not on this webinar, but other folks who you work with actually have other data that they're keeping personally. You actually want to get all that data together. So begin to ask your users, are you sure that you don't have an additional spreadsheet that you want in a source of truth? So we're not going to be able to move to Salesforce and then everybody have a personal spreadsheet. So we need to get all the information that you need right now and get it all together. So anyone's personal spreadsheet, legacy database, anything that you are, a spreadsheet that you move, or a smart sheet, or a table that you move back and forth with another partner or a vendor, all of that information. And here's why. When we do your data estimate, we actually need to all of the data. And so if you, it can be really hard for folks. And if you imagine this, you start your kickoff, we're all ready, we've gotten Salesforce started for you, we're about to get started. And then we say, okay, where's all your data? And you say, I don't know. It can delay the project, right? So what we really want to do is I know where all my data is. It's a mess. We're not going to judge, but at least it's here and we can look at it together with you. If you use codes, so maybe you use mailing codes for emails, for don't contact, maybe use donor codes, major donor versus grants, a grants officer, that sort of thing. Any sort of code, those are often established maybe 10 years ago, and then start to disintegrate a little bit, right? So they're all established, everyone understands the business process, and then as the database gets old and the processes get old, people change what they're doing and sometimes don't change the codes. But you want your new Salesforce database, you want all the codes to be right, and you want defined business processes for each of those, because part of the reason you're moving to Salesforce is because you want your reporting and your data to be right. So if you're thinking through right now, we have to go through our codes, do it now. Start thinking about the business process and the code now. And you can even translate those codes now, which will be much cheaper and much less time consuming for you to just, to sort of discover, oh my gosh, in the middle of implementation, we have to hurry, get our business process together, get all our codes together, and then ask Fíonta to translate those, right? We can do it, but it's expensive, and you actually can do it and probably do it better if you start thinking now and when you have the staff time to do it. And then the other thing to think about is, how will you handle any gap between systems? So what are you going to do with that data from the time that we pull all your data from your system? We said, okay, final data run, and we pull it all, and we put it into Salesforce, which takes a couple days. How are you and your users going to handle those days? Are you going to keep things on the spreadsheet? Is everyone going to keep a notebook? Are you going to double entry in your old system and in your new system? So it's really, really helpful to start thinking now. We're going to have a little bit of a gap. How are we going to handle that? Okay. All right, this is the cleanup thing. And I did it once and I don't think I will ever get over it, where I packed everything without cleaning it first. And then I was in my sparkly new apartment and there was grime over all my stuff, right? So let's go ahead and make the data sparkle now. So we've already talked about standardizing your code tables. If you've got one kind of entry that's spelled 8 different ways and everyone has their own way that they're abbreviating things, now is the time to establish it. This is the way we do it. This is our finite pick list, and go ahead and translate everything else that's there on your own. Another thing to think about is, what data do you actually have to move? We're in a data-driven society, and I know it's hard to say, okay, I'm going to just let this data go. But the more data you have and the more complicated it is, the more expensive it is, and the more likely that it will be not useful to your users. So really think, if we have constituents who have not been active for 5 years, do we still need to be tracking those folks? Is there any reason why we need to do that? Really, not because we're scared we might miss something, but what is our cutoff, right? So really start thinking about, what data do we need? Do we really need activities data from 5 years ago? Do we need to see that Jennifer made a phone call to a prospective donor who never gave 5 years ago? Probably not. So begin to think like, okay, what are our cutoffs? What do we actually need to move? And keeping in mind that the older the data is, the less likely it's useful or even clean, right? And then if you can cut those off your cleaning task, right? If I go through my house and turn to Goodwill everything I don't use anymore, my cleaning task becomes much easier for within the things that go into my box later when I'm going to move my box. The other thing you can do that is really time consuming and tedious and expensive for us to do, but cheaper for you if you can plan now, is to parse name fields. So if you have a tendency, or your database allows you to put first, middle, and last names in one field, go ahead and start working on creating 3 fields, getting Jennifer, Jean, and Alonzo each in their own field, because that's the way Salesforce is going to expect it. All Salesforce documentation is free, so you can actually see all the standard fields in Salesforce, and you can begin thinking about how you're going to map what things are going to have to pull out. Go ahead. More cleanup, because there's another biggie, which is addresses. So 2 things, big habit to put straight city, state, and zip all into one field, especially if you're now working on spreadsheets. Go ahead and start moving those into discrete fields. And then the other thing is, start thinking about, for your states, are we going to spell states out? Are we going to take the 2-letter abbreviation? Or, and this is the wrong answer, are we going to continue to everybody just do their own thing, right? So that's the wrong answer. So choose either the full state name or the abbreviation, and start, at least with your newest data, being consistent with that now. That's going to help you out when you clean up your addresses. These field adjustments, and I'm saying this now because anytime that you change your data mapping with Fíonta, it costs more. So what we do is, we ask for all your data. We ask again, are you sure this is all? Are you sure this is all? And then we give you a really good estimate at your rebaseline. And then and then we map it. So every single field, we have these really, really delightful meetings, which everyone loves. They're not tedious at all, where we look at your field, and then we map it to our Salesforce database field. And then, sorry, I got distracted with the chat. And then, it's set, and then my really, really lovely, easy to work with, great partner, data architect, will go ahead and start scripting for those fields. And If you change your tables during that time, so either change the name of the table, even if you change a space in the table, or you decide, hey, instead of you parsing it out, we're going to change that. He has to change all his scripts, and that can also really blow up your budget. And what makes me sad about that is that if you're using your budget because of not planning now, then you can't do some really cool automations and the kind of stuff that I like to do because you're spending so much time on data. Make sure your casing's proper right now, and start thinking about addresses and salutations. So how do you want people to be addressed depending on their state? So Brian and I are married to each other. I have a different last name. So I'm Jennifer Alonso and he's Brian Wells. Are you the kind of organization which wants your household to be called Jennifer Alonso and Brian Wells household? Or are you the kind of organization who wants to just say Alonso Wells family? So start thinking about that. And then also in terms of salutations, Salesforce has a pick list, so it's consistent, but that means you have to be consistent with your data now. So having MISTER versus r period versus MR period are all different in terms of the way that Salesforce thinks, and they'll kick data out. So if you can choose one and be consistent for the types of folks who you expect to talk to in your organization, maybe it's professor, maybe it's doctor, maybe it's reverend, but get that finite list so that that's set and you've done the translation before you start with us. Again, we don't want to spend a bunch of money on something that is really important for communication, but isn't super sexy for your users. Okay. All right. So you have some tools available to you. In terms of deduplication, if you are using Razor's Edge or another legacy system, there is likely a built-in deduplication system. So either something that alerts you or something that allows you to run a report that says, hey, it feels like Jennifer Alonso with one N and Jennifer Alonso with two N's probably should be the same person because they have the same email. If you have that capability, go ahead and start merging those now. We can merge after we move into Salesforce, but it will delay any of your integrations, right? So the better thing is to start thinking now. We probably do have duplicates in the system. What's our plan for fixing them up? And also, instead of having someone spend 3 weeks deduplicating, maybe everyone again can commit to a couple of days. Or a couple of hours, a couple of records a day for the next 6 months, and then we'll have them all cleaned up. There are third-party tools that can help you either within your legacy system or within, and we can talk more about those when we talk to you. Again, though, it's planning. So maybe I'm thinking right now, should I start investing in a tool now, which gives you control over your schedule, or do you want to wait until after your implementation and be hurried about it with us at the end because you need to launch? So I think the obvious answer is, gosh, we'd rather plan now and go ahead and pay for the tool now. And that way we know that our implementation will be smoother. So I often have clients who say, well, when they're in an emergency situation and they have few staff who can help, they will say something like, well, can't you just deduplicate for us? So we can, right? We can either program our scripts to make some guesses, or we can have a person sit there and try and merge. But the reality is, you know your data and we don't. So if there's no way for us to know who is your most highly valued donor who happens to have the same name as someone who is not a particularly highly valued donor, and we merge and you lose information about the important donors. So your labor for deduplication, regardless of whether you're working with us or you all are doing it, is going to be required. Much better for you to do it now and understand what you have to do and make a plan for it than to do it later when you're in the midst of an already, difficult system change. And we're great to work with. You would get to work with someone like me and my awesome data architect, but implementations are stressful. And so if we can reduce the stressful nature of those by making a data plan now, you're going to be better off, and our work together is going to be easier and less tedious. Oh, and then I forgot. We do recommend that you go ahead and take a look, and you can just Google it, the NCOA, for address normalization. So this is a package that we can have in Salesforce and that you can start integrating now that will allow you to get the right address in a standardized way for American addresses. And it can be really helpful, especially if you do a lot of snail mail or paper mail. All right. So I wanted to stop here and see if anyone has any questions, and then I'll tell you about my favorite client who also had a data disaster. Okay. Looks like we're pretty good. So think of some questions while we're here, and when I tell you this story, we can finish up, and Lexi will help me with that. All right, so this is a client who did exactly who didn't know to do what I'm telling you to do today. And part of actually part of the instigation of this webinar, because the data architect who worked with on that client said it was the very most complicated data that he never had to work with. And it was supposed to be the simplest because they were working off of spreadsheets. The problem was that everybody was working on their own spreadsheet with overlapping information with no key. As we started working on the data estimate, it became clearer and clearer to us that we were not going to be able to dedupe, and that we would actually have to load dirty data into Salesforce and then dedupe in Salesforce using the tools there, which makes me so sad because it's delaying their launch. And they have a really huge gap period between the time of final data and their launch, so that we have time to clean things up. And it's also delaying some other projects. And the other thing is, I mean, honestly, I'd just rather do something really fun in their system that is going to help them and their users than deduping. But it's exactly the right thing for us to do, because if we kept the duplicates in their system, no one could trust the data, and their implementation would fail. So we got to spend the money on the data before we can do anything fun. They were inconsistent with their data entry. So, right, that spelling out Minneapolis versus just putting MINN period. Again, right, everyone's just trying to get their work done. So nobody's to blame, but that inconsistency made it really, really hard for us to map, and really hard for us to get a good script, right? The computer is just as smart as we put into it, and all the time we put into it costs money. And so, we invested, and the client invested in me, good about it. It did cost money. And then the other thing, they had inconsistent business processes, right? Again, we had several people working on several spreadsheets, making their own decisions about the lines between who is a member, who is not a member, who is a lapsed member versus someone who is a new member. Everyone was making their own decisions there. So, right, that isn't actually a database problem. That's a business process problem, but it affects your database, right? Because we couldn't tell the difference between a lapsed member and a new member, because everyone was using a different cutoff date to decide whether someone had to be coded as new or lapsed. So that was really hard. And again, hard for them because they really lost a lot of data that way, because it wasn't consistent, and we had to just not map it and move forward because we didn't have a good business process. So if you have sorts of things like that in your system where, hey, I think everybody's a little loose about what this means, now's the time to start tightening it up, because the only way you can get good data and good reporting is if you have really clear lines between your for your codes and your data. And then the other thing that happened is when they did their data estimate, they gave us examples of their data and opted to not give us their full data, which meant that we did not see all of the spreadsheets that everyone was using, and we didn't see the level of inconsistency in the data until we were at the mapping period. and because we didn't have all that data to look at when we were doing our estimate was off and we had to increase it. So, and from my perception, it's much better to give us everything you have, let us look at it and invest that time so that your estimate is correct and within range. Much better to find out the bad news so you can plan for it before you start your implementation, and then you really don't have a choice, right, that you have to finish. So what happened for this client, right? And we've talked about it. They had some really unexpected costs, which meant that we didn't get to do some of the things that their users really wanted with their system. That was exactly the right thing to do. So as your consultant, I'm always going to say, we got to get the data first before we can do anything else, because if the data is not right, you might as well not have a database. They had unexpected resources that were needed on their team, and this had to do with the deduplication. We can't do it for you because we can't tell who's important and who's not. And so we can help you with it, right? We can ease it for you, but someone with their team had to sit with us as we merged contacts and accounts. And then this brings me to, we actually put dirty data into their system, which just always breaks my heart, makes me sad, because they had to, clean up their house after they moved their stuff in, and that's super not fun. And I would much rather do it ahead of time. So when you get your shiny new database, all the data is sparkly clean inside of it. That is what I have. So that's my story. Like I said, I'm project lead here, so I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Hey, Jennifer, thank you so much for all that information.
Absolutely.
It looks like we do have some questions that have come in. Let's see. Okay. What about masks for non-US addresses and phone numbers?
I'm sorry, say it one more time. What
about masks for non-US addresses and phone numbers?
Gotcha. So actually, Salesforce is pretty good about that and really recognizing a non-US address and not forcing a US address onto your database. So there's some configuration things that we can do with Salesforce, especially if you alert us, like, okay, we've made these decisions, but we have non-US addresses. Can you help us now? And really, alerting the person who works with you in terms of sales that that's going to be a need. We can write that into your contract and make sure that we have included the configuration we need to do for non-US addresses for you.
Great. Okay. If we have old records and or data, do we delete these ourselves?
Great question. So if you are currently in Salesforce, you can actually have the right to do a manual export. I think you can do it once a day and then a scheduled export once a week. So if you're in Salesforce right now, you can go ahead and have your export, and then you can use a tool like Workbench to identify what you want to delete. And we can help you with that. If you are moving from Salesforce to a legacy system, our recommendation is to export all the data, and then we'll help you export just the data that you're going to move. So then you always have that backup. So as lists of tables, and it's a pain and it's hard to figure it out, but if you need it, it's still there.
That's good to know. I would certainly be nervous deleting reams of data from my
system. Well, I always say you can have these tables, and when they're on your hard drive or your server, when you throw the server out, then you can be pretty sure you're probably not going to need it anymore.
Okay, we have a specific question about integrating Salesforce with HubSpot. Are there things to focus on more than others? Maybe we could talk about that sort of general integrations wise also.
Yeah. So, and in fact, and Karen may have some input on this too. So in terms of just marketing pieces, both email marketing and social, what you really want to make sure is that you've identified your source of truth. Is your source of truth Salesforce or is it HubSpot? Which way is your sync happening, and what wins for each field? So you really need to think through, okay, is it a one-way sync? So everything from Salesforce just moves to HubSpot, and then I'm going to upload information from HubSpot, or do I have a two-way sync, or do I have a two-way sync that defines which field? So really important to think about where are the most recent important changes likely to happen, and what do I not want to be overwritten? So for example, I'm a contact, right? And my account is Fíonta. Do you want me to be able to overwrite my account, for example, or is that something that you want to only be able to do in Salesforce, even if I change it in my HubSpot, in my profile with HubSpot? The other thing to think about is that Salesforce doesn't out of the box have all of the fields that you need to track social on HubSpot. So those have to be created. So you really need to think about, okay, what information am I collecting, and what information do I want to live in Salesforce and track in Salesforce, and then what fields do I need to build there and begin to seed there.
And Jennifer, the only thing, this is Karen, the only thing that I would add to that is if you foresee a circumstance where you don't actually need everyone from HubSpot in Salesforce, you can take advantage of some of HubSpot's automations to say segment out super active email users, or say segment out people who haven't opened an email in the last 2 years. And you may determine that particular subset actually never gets integrated with Salesforce until perhaps they pass some threshold, like they have engaged in some meaningful manner.
Yeah, thank you. Exactly.
We are getting some great questions today.
Hey.
Any best practices around handling records that likely belong to the same individual but have different email addresses? One could be inactive with lots of history attached to it, and another is a newer one with little history or activity.
Yeah, so this is my favorite Salesforce tool, which we have to be careful about, but email is the place to do it. So Salesforce does allow you to do a work email, a personal email, and another. It has, especially if you have the NPSP, some ways to kind of control which email is the one for Pardot or another marketing platform. So there's that piece. But the piece that I would suggest here for you is to go ahead and turn on once you're using Salesforce, go ahead and turn on your field history on the email field. So then you can go ahead and keep those emails, right? You'll see them and you'll see what the change is over time. And if the person's like flipping back and forth through a Pardot or another platform, you'll be able to see that and really begin to get an understanding of, okay, this person is the same person and it's 2 emails. I need to merge them together and help them drive them towards picking one.
Great.
And actually, I'm going to say, if you have, I'm just going to talk about actually physical addresses really quick, because same thing. If you have a lot of constituents that have like summer addresses, right? You have high net worth individuals who go to Greece for the summer or whatever. MPSP does have a way for you to control those and keep those in their own field. So there's a whole extra object called addresses for MPSP, and we can build it whether you're using MPSP or not. Allows you to keep a history of addresses and to identify when you should use what address. So that's really handy too if you have a complicated address situation with your constituents.
Okay, we are moving from Razor's Edge to Salesforce and have a ton of very specific appeals that aren't relevant or useful anymore. Do we get rid of those during our cleanup process?
It depends on how old they are, but from what I heard, so as your consultant, I would hear not relevant or useful anymore, and I'd say trash them. No, right? Because it's just extra stuff that muddies the waters, and really, we want to get the most useful stuff. We want you to leverage Salesforce so that you can increase your fundraising, and if those things aren't helping you towards that, if your vision is that like these things are not going to be part of us, I would dump them. If you have, now what does happen is sometimes executives, no one on this call, but you know who I'm talking about, will want to keep that information because it might be useful sometimes. And what we can do is we can go ahead and just mark it legacy. So we can go ahead and create it, mark it legacy, and create a way so that folks don't see those, but if you need, if someone wants to see it in the database later, they can. So highest recommendation, dump it. If that's not possible, then let's find a way to make sure that we're clear that it's legacy and shouldn't be considered in reporting.
Okay. Our data goes back as far as 2009 and even earlier. How much of this should we bring to Salesforce?
So the out of hand, I usually say, and of course we would have a discussion with this, it's part of the consulting that we do, but out of hand, I'd say nothing more than 5 years, with the exception of some, you may identify 10 or 15 if you are a donation organization or that sort of thing where you want to keep things. The other thing to think about is, do I need, if I'm a membership organization, for example, and we have people who have been members for 20 years, we kind of want to know that who's been a member for 20 years, but we can think about that as like, can we create a field that says member since and not create a record for every single membership for the last 20 years, right? So there's some things that we can do to grab the information that you truly do need and dump the rest. But usually it's 5 years.
Okay. Are you familiar with Salesforce's grants management system? How complicated do you think the transition will be from Foundation Connect when they stop supporting it and grants management?
Oh my gosh, you're going to love it. You're going to love it. Much less complicated. Much less complicated. Much easier to use. It does still use the Salesforce community, but from what I have seen, the look is better. And they're making a lot of strides in terms of that look and feel. The actual work that you have to do is going to be so much less headache. So I would look forward to that transition.
Okay. All right. Which of these tasks would you recommend doing on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, right. And I should have said that. I'm so glad you asked that, because of course the point is, it would be really great if we were doing this all the time, right? So, and this is one of the things that Salesforce can do for you, is we can go ahead and set up duplication management so that it's someone's job once a week to scan for account and contact duplicates. And also we can alert on the record anytime someone gets in there that you have a dupe. So we can help you with that. Like, let's think about what is our business process for we call it our data governance, because we like to be fancy. So I would say deduplication, and that should be someone's job at least once a week, right? So I get a task in Salesforce, hey, time to dedupe, go check the report, check it out, and merge and follow through. So that's one piece. In terms of business processes, I really think that that's important to do. And I would say this is important to do as a whole system governance, is let's look at business processes at least once a year and codes at least once a year, so that we're staying consistent. So it gives us an opportunity to say, is this code still useful? Is this campaign, is this appeal still useful? If not, let's retire it. If so, let's make sure that everybody understands the rules for using this. Right. And then as you all work together with all your, with your governance team, you can begin to get feedback from folks about what is confusing, what folks aren't using anymore, and you can keep your system clean rather than cleaning, at the end when you decide to, you would never leave Salesforce, of course, but when you decide to move data around.
Okay. Oh, we have a follow-up. When you say get rid of data older than 5 years, are you recommending that within an active donor's record who has been giving for 20 years, we would only see 5 years of activity?
Yeah, I think that's one of those cases. So it may be that you want to go and not do all of your donations for 5 years, but really identify your major donors and folks who have really been with you for a long time, and go ahead and move that data. So, as I say, it would be a consulting discussion about what is useful for you. And again, do you need to know the date that person donated, the amount, and your conversations about that person for the entire 20 years, or do you just need to know this person has been a donor for 20 years and their legacy total is $100,000? So we can help you think through that.
Yeah, it seems, Jennifer, like some of this cleanup, as you get reacquainted with all of this maybe old or less useful data, it can really inform your conversations with your consultant.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And that's part of, right, maybe looking to you and saying, oh my gosh, here's some things I noticed about our data because I've been doing this data cleanup.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions we have in the queue for now. I'm going to do one last call for questions if anyone has any. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we've answered all the questions for today, but if any questions should come up, you can always find us online at fíonta.com or at LinkedIn or on Twitter. And of course, we will be sending out this deck and the recording of the presentation as well. So you'll have our contact information that way also. And on behalf of the Fíonta team, I would like to thank Jennifer first for an engaging and wonderful presentation. And I'd also like to thank all of our attendees for coming today. I hope you found it useful. I certainly learned a lot. So thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you all.